Hello and welcome to episode 291 of the Thursday Night Podcast. Back after a little bit of an extended, just a weird schedule time with everything. Basketball always gets a bit kind of hackneyed in the way the season ends with this kind of mid-stretch we're in where not really a full week off before the tournament starts, and that's certainly the case for Georgia State on both fronts, for men's and women's basketball. Both go 1-3 in their 4-game homestands to end the season. Both will be playing in the first round of the Sun Belt tournament next Tuesday against the same team even. So just a lot of sameness going on all around. Good news on the baseball front, a signature win, and the winning continues on Friday night against Belmont as they start this road series. And at some point today, was not entirely sure when I was trying to look it up before recording this podcast. Ted Hurst and the receivers will go through their workouts at the NFL Combine. Tight ends were really late last night, so I'm wondering if it might be the same case where it's kind of late. So by the time this podcast is actually out on YouTube and Spotify, wherever you listen, you might be able to go check it out on NFL Network, but I can't actually tell you when it's happening because I don't know. But at some point today, Ted Hurst is going to be doing his tests. I wanted to throw that in there somewhere just to mention it. Not a lot to say until we know how he tests, but as we talked about with the 40 time, Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon, just maybe made himself a top 10 pick by going 4.39 on his 40 yesterday. So it's a similar thing with Ted where maybe the leap's not going to be that big, but we have seen real tangible evidence of a different draft crush reaching a new pinnacle for people after yesterday when he did what he did in his 40 time. And Ted's kind of in the same boat as we've touched on a couple of times, but should talk about the basketball. Not going to do the same bit as last week, 5 minutes or less, just because, frankly, there are 4 games to talk about, so there is not enough. There's too much to talk about in the stretch of time, but going to rattle through the results quickly. Starting with the win for the men, actually, last Thursday. They beat Georgia Southern 66-64, up by 10 at the break, and hold on by their chin down the stretch to win by 2, at least avoid a rivalry sweep in a season that's gone otherwise pretty pear-shaped. And then Saturday, they followed it up with, I'd say, a frankly really disappointing, just poor effort, losing 80-65 against James Madison. This week, lose a couple of tight ones. They're down by 2 at the break to Coastal Carolina on Tuesday night. I end up losing 76-71, unable to come back in that one. And then in yesterday's finale on Friday night on Senior Day, up by 6, up 42-36 at the break against Old Dominion, a team they had lost to by 23 on the road 13 days prior. But then the second half looked more like that game did in Norfolk as they're outscored by 14. They lose 81-73 to leave them matching year one under Jonas Hayes with a 10-win regular season. They're 10-21. They're the 13 seed. They will play Louisiana 6 p.m., the first game of the men's portion of the tournament next Tuesday on March the 3rd. A rematch of a game that they lost by 10 in Lafayette earlier in the conference slate. I don't know where you want to take it. I mean, just kind of rattled through everything there, and you can, any of the games you want to touch on. Obviously, we don't need to go into agonizing detail on all of them or any of them, frankly, because it's just more of the same of this team is who it is. And the other thing to mention is the ODU game, which probably feels like the most regrettable, the one that was the most in the balance. They were 22 of 34 on free throws. They were 14 of 22 on free throws in the second half. When this team does not make free throws, I don't think they have a chance. And they're number 3 in the country entering this game. You can really kind of look at it and just say, that is a place where this team has been good, and they let themselves down in this one, and it ultimately was the difference. Those 8 missed free throws in the second half is literally the scoreboard difference.
I mean, it's tough because you saying that the opponent is Louisiana reminded me that this kind of stretch that they are currently on, they ended the season 1-9, 1 win in their last 10 games. It started with that 10-point road loss at Louisiana.
Hope was so springing eternal. It was kind of like...
Exactly.
Win this one, maybe you feel good about South Alabama, and so on and so on, and Boy, has that not panned out.
The balloon, like, water wasn't let out of the balloon. The balloon was curb stomped by a grenade. It has been very disappointing because, I mean, think about the 1-8 stretch to start the season. We said the same things, you know. It's the defensive effort hasn't been good enough. You know, what did I say the last pod? They're allowing teams to get into the 80s far too frequently. Coastal and Old Dominion notwithstanding, but most other teams down the stretch, they had been getting into the 80s, you know. And the offense,
and, you know, 76 is not like that far off of 80. It just like doesn't hit your benchmark.
Exactly. And the offense is they're just not finding enough. And it's frustrating because in talking to, you know, a Panther fan recently, they noted that like there's a bunch of people who seem like they can score, but they're not putting it together in the same game. And like that is absolutely the case. You know, in the middle of the season, you know, when Jelani Hamilton was going off, and I don't even say this to criticize him or anything like that. When Hamilton was going off, it seemed like, okay, this guy's going to have to score like 25 to 30 for Georgia State to be lifted above. But the defensive effort was there, so it felt a lot better. And I think you can get a game where Malachi Brown is going to get you 25 points. You know, you can get a game where Micah Tucker is going to get you 20 points, you know, potentially. So it's not like there isn't talent on the team. It never coalesces on both sides of the court in the same game. And it's never, you know, one night it's one guy, everybody else is a very quiet night. The next night it's one guy, everybody else is a quiet night. It's the same thing that we've seen with the women. You know, their issue is they're struggling to find a consistent third, fourth scorer to go along with Crystal Henderson. But as the season went on, their second scorer became an issue. The men never really consistently had a second scorer, even when they were, you know, winning those games in the middle of the season there. And, you know, the Georgia Southern game was the closest simply because Southern shot one. They shot horrible from the floor and from three. And then number two, Georgia State made their free throws and Georgia Southern didn't. 2-point win. You know, so it's very frustrating because we've said it all year. I think there is talent on this team. I do. I really think there's talent on this team. But that talent is never going to manifest itself if it's going to be as inconsistent as it has been so far this year. You know, I don't know what Tuesday's going to. I don't know what Tuesday's going to be like, but I have to assume that it's going to be more of the same as it's been going down the stretch.
Yeah, you mentioned the Southern game there. You did have double-digit scoring from all three of the triumvirate of Brown, Hamilton, and Tucker, and that was enough. Obviously, you mentioned Southern, especially in the first half, just really taking a lot of threes, not making a bunch of them. Percentage went up as I think the denominator went down for them in the second half. They took less. They were 6 of 15, and they made a run at it, and they ended up taking the lead, and it felt like a familiar thing. We how many times, maybe not all of them were losses, but how many times has this team been up double digits at the half, and it's ended up being a dogfight in the stretch anyway? Like, unfortunately, very familiar kind of setting where it's like, maybe they're still going to eke it out, but I wasn't sitting there, and this is one of those games I did not attend in person, but I wasn't sitting there watching it going like, what's happening? It's like, oh yeah, this is they played better the first half, kind of lose it, the stretch, the other team starts making shots and just getting back into the game. You go other games this stretch, and a lot of them, you know, against JMU, the same thing. Tucker had 22 points, Hamilton had 19, Malachi Brown had 11. You had against Coastal Carolina, Malachi Brown 26. I think he's at a really solid end of the season that's got overshadowed by the fact that like there's not a lot of sunshine to talk about. It's like it doesn't feel like worth singling out. But I think he scored 20 points, I think, in half of the last 8 games, something like that. So shout out Malachi for that. Jelani had 14, Micah with 12. And then we go to ODU. We finally, in this stretch of 4 games, Anthony Eno had 10 points. That is the only other scorer in these 4 games that got to double digits other than those 3. And so forget about, you know, Jelani's 3 of 15 shooting. He gets to 20 points against ODU just because of the free throw line. But, like, they're not always, like, those 3 are not always efficient offensively at the same time. Past that, you're getting a lot of zeros on the box score. You know, the ODU game, over half the guys you played didn't score. And granted, Christian Beam played 6 minutes, James Cooper played 2, Chris Jones played 4. You add those up, you're barely to just a rotation, just one guy in the rotation. But no points from them. Ayuba Bertha, 0 for shooting, 0 of 3 from 3, just on 12 minutes. That's the guy, that's the spot. And you look at Tenari Lane, had a good shooting season at San Diego. You didn't replace Tenari ever. You thought Bertha was maybe going to be that piece, but you never really got that sharpshooter specialist you were hoping to get. And it's a really shallow team offensively. If those big three, if you don't have a 30-point performance from Jelani, or just those three don't have at least 2 of those guys really firing, the offense can get really slow, really stagnant in a hurry. And in the ODU game specifically, the pace between the two halves was jarringly different. It scored 42 points in 20 minutes, and then followed that up by 27. And even that was a bit kind of, as the game dragged on, they got over to that point. But it was there was a lot of fouls. The pace of the game really got just completely cut off. And it felt like that from the Georgia State perspective. And then you go to the other side, ODU wasn't having a great game, but in those closing moments, it was just guys knowing what they needed to do to get to their spots on the floor, making layups, getting and ones, and just kind of by attrition closing that game out. They were up for most of the final 10 minutes and just never winning enough scoreless stretches where Georgia State was able to mount and come back there. And so it got close-ish. It was a 2-point game with 2 minutes left, but once Georgia State missed their shot to tie the game there and ODU went down and got another and one, it just started to feel more like dagger after dagger, and it's kind of you're not getting a comeback here. And we've just seen it a lot. And no matter what, this final closing stretch, whether it was to get to the 1 seed, whether it was going to be the difference between getting to the 5 or the 6, and whatever it might have been, we knew this 4-game stretch was going to be important as far as you're closing with 4 at home. This is where you want to play your most meaningful games. They went 1-3, and they're going to be playing in the first game. They're going to be one of the bottom 2 seeds, but for the grace of ULM being very, very bad, they are the worst of the kind of the regular class of the Sun Belt this year, because everyone is a lot better than ULM. Georgia State's 13th. They are the worst of the rest.
And I mean, this is the same thing that we said in year 1 of Coach Hayes. That whole offseason, we talked about how they wore those shirts that said that they were better than this. They had the record, the previous conference record or overall record. I don't think any of those players are still here, but they're still that same record 3 seasons later,
And this was needed to be the year where it was a jump. Yep. Even if it was kind of you're 16-15 with a negative point differential, and it's we don't know that this team is that much better than they've been. I think that would have been enough. Whether you want to say right or wrong, I think if this team has a winning record this year, if you flip that, you're 10 wins to 16 wins. If they do that and it's just conference wins, they would have won the conference if they were 6 wins better. And obviously, I think you would probably take a bit from non-con and just try and not go 1-9 in that spot. But again, we don't need to keep going over old territory, but there was a 6-way tie for second place. I mean, the tiebreaker scenario was a disaster. People were waiting 45 minutes. The league put out a tiebreaker that didn't match what the expectation was. A couple of teams got screwed relative to expectations, and it's a mess. But it's a mess Georgia State wanted to be part of and weren't. They were settled as, if they lose this game against Old Dominion, they will be the 13th seed, come what may, in the rest of the league. It'll just be about who they play. And it's they weren't that far away from being in kind of the muck there, but in another sense, they were very, very far away. And it goes back to being the 13th best team by the standings in this version of the Sun Belt is terrible. This is not a good league this year. There's a lot of teams in the same kind of middle tier, and Georgia State feels worlds away from that. And that is damning in itself.
I mean, it used to be that, Troy, I don't want to say Troy felt like a rival, but at least those games were spirited. There was some, conference implications in those games. Do you personally feel like Georgia State is close to where Troy is right now? I would say Georgia State's not even close to where Coastal and App State are right now.
Well, the one rival is like the team you're going to play in the tournament. Like, there's history with Louisiana, and they keep playing each other in the Sun Belt tournament, so it's going to happen again. Obviously, the Bob Marlin stuff is gone. Quantus White, now the head coach there, coming over from Calvin Sampson's staff at Houston. I don't really have a whole lot more to say. I mean, like, frankly, we're just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. Just all transparency. When this run is over, we are expecting there to be a change at head coach. Just kind of is what it is. And if there isn't really much to talk about as far as, like, defending it, because it has been 4 losing seasons. The decade prior to this, there was just one of those, and it was followed by a team that damn near made the tournament, so people could really quickly forget about that losing season in Ron Hunter's second season. There's not much to say about it. The cake is baked as far as I'm concerned, and the way that they closed, losing 9 of 10, right when they had grabbed a foothold and maybe were going to play in the middle of the conference, it's kind of the last straw. I mean, really the last straw was losing by 22 to Eastern Michigan in the opening night, going 1-9 in non-conference, kind of just selling in non-conference again, just a continuing trend there where non-conference has just been a mess for all 4 seasons. But it's like, there's nothing more that we need to say that is going to spell out why this has been an unsuccessful head coaching tenure. And I think whenever the run in Pensacola comes to an end will be the end of that tenure. And from then, I think it's exciting because you can pine for the future for the first time. When I think even when we were saying, all right, they're going to give Jonas another chance heading into year 4, or you're heading into year 2, it's like, all right, give him a chance to grow as a head coach. And there was progress. So year 2 to year 3, you were thinking, all right, let's see if they can take another step, and a serious step back to what we're used to. There's no more of that can be told. There's none of that you're going to believe. It's just magic beans at this point to believe that this is going to be anything other than what it has been. And so with that, it's a team you lost to at double digits. It was on the road, and it's still a team that I think just on paper, you're not out of the same caliber of league with. Like, you can beat this Louisiana team, especially, any of the guys we mentioned as those 3, like, drop 20 points. Couple of them, you get like 20 from Jelani, 18 from one of Micah or Malachi. That's a winnable game, but I just don't know what team's going to show up. The defense has just continued to be an issue the last few weeks, and in this stretch, Louisiana, not a home run hitter in their own right. They're also identical at 10-21, 7-11 in league play. They've won 5 games in the stretch of time that has taken Georgia State to win 1. And so even as they are losers of 5 of their last 6 heading into the Sun Belt tournament, they are the hotter team by virtue of them having gone on a 4-game winning streak before that, starting with beating the same team, I think exactly a month ago, or like 30 days ago. You don't know what to expect. I don't know what to expect. It's hard to expect this to be successful or a long-time stay in Pensacola. And if they do win, whoever wins will play the 9 seed James Madison, who's a team that beat you by 15 in your own building not that long ago, and Very was on their way to beating you by that kind of margin up in Harrisonburg before. It was a nice comeback that Georgia State mounted to send that game to overtime. But kind of the balance of those 2 games doesn't tell me that that's a great matchup for this team either. And all of that to say, it's year 1 for Quantus White at Louisiana. It feels like the end of the rope here at Georgia State. It just feels to me like the type of game where I think I can just sense who is going to be ready to go in this one and who's kind of still possibly on the upward trajectory, whereas not the case here. And so I don't know our exact recording plans, but we plan to talk about the Sun Belt basketball, the tournament games as they come. The men and the women both being on Tuesday is helpful for the purposes of we can probably line it up whenever we do it. We will be back after that game when we talk about basketball again, or the men's basketball at least. I kind of expect it's going to be finale time at that point.
Yeah, I would love for some sort of indication that that's not the case. Jelani Hamilton finds Michael's secret sauce or secret stuff or whatever the Space Jam bit is. the ghost, he's still alive, but the ghost of Greg Popovich, imbues in some clipboard that Coach Hayes has. It's some Belt reporter, please let me know what you find, because it does not seem like we will be talking about men's basketball in terms of active games after Tuesday, which sucks. Like that, you and I are not the type of people to be negative Nancy's, but like that objectively sucks. Like, what has this team shown us recently to indicate that there will be more basketball after Tuesday? And I don't even mean that they just lost to Louisiana a month ago.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the best thing you can say is they didn't totally collapse after, what game was that? Just kind of the James Madison game, but the weekend before, just kind of the total no-show. And when he yelled, and I was at that press conference, as frustrated as Jonas has been. I think that was the JMU game. Yeah. And this is, I guess we are continuing to talk about men's basketball. It didn't feel like it was him yelling at serving any kind of purpose. It felt like a guy who's legitimately just angry and frustrated. And some of that, I imagine, is kind of feeling the weight of like where this program's at right now. It's not gone well. I don't believe for a second that he is as mad and frustrated. He has wanted this to succeed all along, as much or more than anyone on this podcast, listen to this podcast. I know he wanted to make this work, and I think some of that is coming through, but it just is another part of like the puzzle with Jonas that hasn't always clicked. Is like coaches will go into press conferences and like use it as a motivational tactic and be like, this is the time I need to like talk to my players through this situation. And the kind of fire and brimstone that we got in that speech after the game was a 2-minute press conference, just very frustrated, talking about how the starting five set a terrible tone in that game against James Madison, and they did. It felt like not any kind of psychological game being played or kind of motivational factor. It just felt like raw, he was angry.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I do. I empathize with the man, I have never had any reason to doubt that, he's a solid person, solid dude, and I understand being frustrated at this. I mean, it's been these guys, when they're players, they want to be the absolute best, and when they're coaches, they also want to be the absolute best. And I mean, it's been 4 years of banging your head against the wall to essentially get some very similar results. So, I get it. I mean, their best season, they were 7th in the Sun Belt in his tenure. I think their highest win total in the last 4 years is 14 games?
14.
14 twice. 14 on a, 30-ish, 31-ish game schedule. Like, that's tough. It is.
They hadn't hit that mark in the last decade before. Even the losing season, they went 15-16. So these have been just, for this history, this run of Georgia State basketball in the 21st century. I mean, it's not the lowest point because Rod Barnes' winning percentage was lower, but I think in the context of there had been kind of a lull after Lefty before Rod Barnes came in. The highs were, they made the tournament 4 times. Like, it turning into you're losing that many seasons in a row when they had the success they had the last decade. It just disappointing and unfortunate, and soon we'll be done talking about it. And it's kind of the same vibes on the women's side. They did win their finale to kind of end the season on a high note against this very same Louisiana team that both teams will be playing in the first round Sun Belt tournament. But before that, they lose 88-75 at home to ODU, 82-75, showed some fight against a good Marshall team on last Saturday, lose 92-84 to Coastal on Tuesday night. So the team got swept in that Coastal doubleheader that was happening on Tuesday, and they will be the 11 seed. The win against Louisiana does, I think, keep them at that spot, but that is still the first round of action. So it'll be another doubleheader, literally, because at 3 on a Tuesday, they will play as the 11 seed, the 14-seeded Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. I think it's been more of the same, kind of a slog for this team, but you like to see them end on a high note at home, get the job done against Louisiana. Although, does that set up kind of like the team who just lost gets the revenge factor? I don't know, but I'm not as sure. Like, I think they will be the favorite to win this game. They would play ULM as the 10 seed if they do advance to Wednesday. Yeah, they lost ULM the only time they played them this year. It's kind of by a heavy margin, but I don't know if I am as kind of like low on them just the way this sets up. Like, you could tell me that they're going to make it to at least the third round and play Southern Miss the 7 seed, and it's like, okay, whatever. Like, they might be able to do that. Certainly, I think that they've had struggles through the year, kind of playing consistently, and we talked about the rebounding ad nauseum. But, like, I still trust that, like, in this kind of tournament setting, they're going to come out and play the style they're going to come out and play and kind of be able to set the tone as best as they are able to under Gene Hill, in a way that I don't really with the men's team, where it doesn't feel as consistent with what you're getting night after night. Like, it's been pretty consistently not that great for the women's team, but they know what they want to be. And coming off of their first high in a little while, because they've only had 2 wins in the last few weeks of the season, maybe that's the extra kind of boost they need. And I could see their season, even though they play first, I think that their season could certainly last longer than the men do in Pensacola, although with both of them, they would have to win 7 games in 7 days in this format of the Sun Belt Tournament with the stairway to 7. And it's not practical to predict. Even if we felt better about either of these teams, that's a huge task. That is a lot of work on your legs. But I think they could maybe make a little mini run of it, kind of like they did last year, even if it isn't still going to manifest in any kind of major season-altering big run.
Yeah. The thing that helps the women is, I think, as we've seen in the past few years, the Sun Belt is very top-heavy on the women's side. It is, unfortunately, Georgia Southern and Troy at the very top. Yes, there's a couple other teams around there in Arkansas State and James Madison, but the rest of it is a bunch of just, like, okay teams. And that is where there is probably an avenue for Georgia State. If it's a horrible shooting tournament for a lot of teams, I think Georgia State has an individual talent level that could raise them past a couple of opponents, like you said. I don't want to sit here and tell you they're going to just Crystal Henderson their way into the semifinals, because that feels a little disingenuous. But I think there is enough there to indicate that they could be playing, a couple of days after Tuesday. Louisiana, I think, is a good matchup for them, just because, yes, they did beat them at the end of the season. But I think Georgia...
Guess who's near them, near the bottom of the rebounding tally in the Sun Belt?
Yep.
Georgia State is last. Louisiana is second to last.
Correct. So I think that specifically is a good matchup for Georgia State. What happens after that, I don't know. This stretch was really tough for the women. You could definitely tell that whatever injury Crystal Henderson had, it definitely affected her going the ODU game. Marshall's a really solid team. They were just underneath that James Madison line that I was talking about earlier, so that one was always going to be a little bit tough. And then Coastal, Georgia State should probably have had a better showing against Coastal. I think Coastal, it wasn't the rebounds that did it. I think just they were kind of very evenly matched, and Coastal hit more free throws. Sometimes that happens. That's honestly just basketball.
And
it went to overtime as well.
Sight unseen, yeah, like with the overtime factor as well. This team giving up 80 plus, 90 plus points, probably not a recipe for them to win their style of game. And so with it kind of shaping up like that, it feels like it was maybe played a little bit more on Coastal's terms, which could factor into you losing that game. But they've forced some overtimes in some games that, quote unquote, they shouldn't.
They're scrappy.
And they're still out there. Yeah. And I think that's a credit to what Gene Hill is bringing. I mean, not the year that they wanted, and this year 7, 8, and like, it hasn't been a run of massive success for Gene Hill, and so I don't know what the future is there. I think, frankly, there isn't as much of an appetite to kind of force a change there. Probably easier to do it if you just want to kind of shake it up there, but I don't really have a good feel on, like, where the vibes are with, like, is Gene Hill near the end of his run as well? Kind of feel like with the other needs, like the coaching search you need to do on the basketball front this offseason, doesn't feel like you want to just kind of foist two right on top of each other. And this year hasn't gone well, and like the overall record isn't stellar, but just looking at it, I don't know that I think that next year is a absolute certainty to go poorly. Like, you could talk me into Gene Hill gets players who can play the style he wants to play. I guess I don't know what Crystal's plan is, but she has another year if she wants to use it and wants to stay here. That would be any coach would love the starting point of having that type of player. I can't like sight unseen say like they couldn't put it together next year, because he's done enough with certain parts of the program and how he's built it that there are strengths this team can lean on. I just think the ways that this team was not set up to succeed outweighed those this season, and it led to pretty inconsistent play, some glaring statistical anomalies that went against them, and just kind of led to, in a good league, contrasting to the men, I think the women's top to bottom, especially at the top, is as good as it's been in a few seasons. It just wasn't the year to be the type of team where you were still trying to find it in the middle of the year.
And I agree with you, and this isn't even necessarily a dig, because it's just natural that you're going to make a juxtaposition here. I don't think that you can look at the women's stretch down the schedule down the stretch here and say that these losses are coaching. I don't think you can. I think that, obviously you don't want to be losing some of these games. You lost to Marshall by 15. That's not good. I'm not going to tell you that's good. You lost to Old Dominion by 13 at home. Again, not good. I'm not going to lie to you and say that that's good. But I'm also not going to play in your face and say that I think that the coaching was the issue in some of these games. That, as far as I
short
can
of
tell,
like, the coach is always at fault. Like what
right.
He takes the responsibility at the end of the day, and it's his job to fix it heading into next year. But
Sure.
like, I understand your point of like, we have had things we have been looking at with Jonas Hayes and the coaching staff for 4 years at this point. And there hasn't been that much priors with Gene Hill, where especially last year, like, things went better. And it was just a better mix, and you had some players that you lost that I just don't think you replicated as well as you maybe hope you were going to with the women's team. Whereas we don't need to do a whole other diatribe on the men's team. But I think everyone listening understands your point. People who've been following the women's team, I still think there's something you can like about what Gene has been able to bring. And this, like, I keep going back to it, but it's kind of like, they know what they want to be, and I think it just moving forward about being a better version of that. And yes, I think some of that's going to come down to, if you're bringing it back, just recruiting better and not having you lose Mahogany Matthews and you don't really replace that type of player. But it's also about development, and Grace Lanier's had some really standout performances down the stretch to not be missed as a freshman, and so you hope that she's coming back and you can help build on that as well and keep her development going, because you can't lose that development piece, especially at this level. If you can get players to stick around for multiple years, you've got to get them to where they are better players than they were the year before. And if they're already pretty good players and if they're better the next year, that's going to bode pretty well for what your chances are to improve on what was not the season they've wanted to have. And so the women play 3 on Tuesday. There's a break, so I feel like the men's game's probably going to start about on time, but you know how these things go with these tournaments. The men are, quote, at 6 Eastern. And those games back-to-back. A lot going on in Georgia State and Louisiana World in basketball on Tuesday afternoon and evening. And we'll move forward from there as far as how those games go might shape how our coverage comes, but we won't be too far away from the podcast mics to be back in your feeds to talk about those games when they come. I don't know if you have anything else to say about the basketball stuff. I feel like 33 minutes, 34 minutes is an absolute win of getting all that we got out of it, because frankly,
hey, for 8 games, that's about 5, with 5 each.
We could have probably cut it in half and not said nearly as much, because kind of a lot of the same story as both those teams go, and sort of is what it is. And I think everyone kind of looks forward to the offseason at this point, and we might not be that far away from it. Pretty far away from the baseball offseason, and pretty far away as far as the vibes go. Georgia State wins 9-4 at, okay, I'm going to, number 5, number 2, it's a top 5 win. The rankings are all over the place. It technically ties the best record, like the best win against a ranked team Georgia State's had in any sport. But I believe if you go by the number 2 ranking, it would be the best ever win for the baseball team. No matter what, like, that's all stuff, like, I get anal about that stuff a lot. Like, so I get it. I'm not the people who care about like this ranking or that ranking are like, is this really the best win ever? Like, I'm not disputing that like it matters to be accurate about these things, but really the most important thing is that it is a really big win against a team that the bar was Georgia Southern lost by 24 to this team at home. Hang with them. And then as the game went on and they're building a lead, it was like, oh, they've got a chance in this one. And big picture, one game doesn't mean too much in baseball season because the next game you can go out and lose by 10. But I will say this. I feel pretty comfortable taking the over on the 12th out of 14 preseason poll for this team. Like, they've still got a big step up to come when they go to conference play, and one win against Georgia Tech is not a season make, but team capable of doing what they just went out and did in Midtown on Tuesday, that's going to be at least a decent baseball team.
I'm going to push back on you just a little bit, if you'll allow me, because while I agree with you that one win against Georgia Tech does not make a season, judging by where Georgia Tech has been through their first 10 games, might potentially tell us more about Georgia State than I think we will find out should we give more credit to. And the reason I say that is because Georgia Tech has 9 wins currently. They're 9-1. Outside of the Georgia State game, they have only one other win where they beat Stony Brook by 1 in extra innings. Some of these margins of victories are insane. We talked about it going into the last pod. Like, I'm just going to give the differentials, not going to give the opponents because I don't think that really matters. 6, 23, 10, 24, 9, 5, 18. And then after losing to Georgia State, yesterday they hosted Northwestern and won by 14. So regardless of, midweek, who was starting, who was playing, honestly, I don't really care. I believe Georgia State held Georgia Tech to their fewest runs in a game. They have allowed more than... Georgia State scored the most that anybody has scored against Georgia Tech. So that was a really good win. Just point blank period. And the way that baseball works sometimes, and we say it all the time on this podcast, if you just have the confidence of, oh, I had a really good stretch this week, you can just, sometimes the game of inches that is the game of baseball allows you to continue that up. I know we've proven that momentum and clutch aren't really things and blah, 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 but sometimes it just is nice to feel good. And I think Georgia State, as a baseball team right now, they feel good. And they're playing extremely well. That was a very well-played game by Georgia State, just hands down. And got a little tense in the ninth there-ish, but also not really. Like, it really felt like they had a handle on things. It was mostly just because there was some traffic in a way that, like, there hadn't been for a lot of the game. But truthfully, hats off to Georgia State for this one.
I mean, the thing is, once you get to the ninth inning in baseball, you're just apocryphizing, and it's kind of like, bases are loaded, it's a one-run game, they're going to hit a grand slam here, and it's going to be 9-8 all of a sudden, and tying runs at the plate. Like, there's something psychological about just those final 3 outs, the final 27 outs, that you got some traffic and got a bit nervy just because it always does, but even then, they were still 2 swings away from it being a tie game. And they hadn't really put together those type of hits all game. After the first inning, Jaron Advincula, it's a 2-run home run. And it's like, all right, so you're starting from behind here against a good lineup. And it's going to be just kind of like, how do you battle? And Cole Roberts got right back on schedule right after that. Didn't give up any runs after that. He goes 4 innings. Kind of a weird, like, he made a catch of like a screaming liner in his face. And ended up kind of like, look, it was his calf or something. So he leaves the game after 4. And this is where it got really interesting for me. And my eyes were opened to someone who I had not been paying attention to on this roster yet. Freshman left-handed pitcher Cooper Lewis, who looks like the next one Brad Stromdahl and his staff have just found in recruiting in the state of Georgia. It's a lefty out of Chamblee High School. He was sitting like 95, 96 with a killer curveball. And he just kind of had that it factor. He just came in and he was getting outs left, right, and center. Got a little bit out of gas down the stretch. He goes 2 innings. In the second inning, he walks the bases loaded on a stretch. I think it was like 12 or 13 balls in a row. He lost his command there, but Strahm leaves him out there to find it again. He gets a strikeout, big fist pump, leaves the game, lead intact. They built on it from there, and Cole Roberts, I still thought it was going to shift to the weekend at some point, but I guess maybe not, and obviously we wait to see what the after effects of the injury, whatever he left the game with, but this is an interesting kind of setup here. If this is going to be some kind of a midweek, or whether it's with Roberts or with one of the other starters, just you've got righties out of the Tyson Benford, the Friday starter, for example. You've got a lefty in Cooper Lewis that you seem to be using out of the bullpen, maybe kind of like we did with Brady Jones, that he could pop 96. He's got a nice curveball, and then Will Barkowski, the Alabama state transfer you got, is a submariner. So not only do you have some arms that kind of have some juice for you, that's three distinctly different batters. Batters had to be ready for three pretty drastically different styles of pitching, different arm angles to be ready for in one game. And they've got the opportunity to use those guys out of the bullpen on the weekend as well. And so it's why holding this Georgia Tech team to 4 runs and 2 over the first 6 innings and kind of grabbing control of that game, that's the most impressive part for me, even though the 9 runs and the small ball stuff that's really working is great. And it's why, to your point, one win is just one win, but this is as close to being a more significant thing than just that kind of old adage about baseball. Because it is a top 5 win, and the way they did it not only feels replicable against some of the better teams they're going to play, but it's, we're learning that this team is different, and it maybe is built in a more sustainable way, and there was uncertainty based on who they had lost, especially on the lineup side, and I think those nerves have calmed some.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit skeptical when Stromdahl mentioned that they were trying to go a little bit away from the home run ball this year, because I thought that was what really did help them a lot. And, I mean, so far it's working. I know that the Sun Belt in terms of baseball is really tough. So if you want to look at it from that perspective where, this win might not mean anything in the grand scheme of things, but I just like the way that they're deploying some of the pitching. I like how the lineup, regardless of if they put up a lot of Ks, regardless of if, they're finding ways to get traffic on the bases, even if they're still striking out a lot. You'll see that in, some of the other games that we talk about. But, just to go back to the Bartkowski point just really quickly, it did not seem that Tech could figure out how to time up his motion at all. And if not for some just general wildness, in the 8th and 9th, I really think that would have been a much cleaner line for him, because it really was like they were guessing at the plate there. And yes, some of them still made some contact. I believe it was a double in the 9th. It was a pretty good double to left field. I think that pitch was left up a little bit higher than they had initially wanted. But they just did not seem very comfortable. Some of the swings were as close to ugly as quote-unquote regular swings can be. And they looked at some pretty good pitches. So I had to shout out Will just for a second there, because I like the delivery. I like me a good submariner sometimes. Just change the eye level, change the angle of something, because sometimes hitters, they're just not ready for it.
And especially if the last guy you face is coming to the other side of the plate, dropping 96 on you. We kind of have had these discoveries. Brady Jones mentioned, Davis Chastain, where it's kind of young guys kind of thrown into the mix, and it just feels like such a tangible win for Stromdahl that not only did he give kind of a learning moment for Lewis to kind of battle there, but that he won, that he got out of there unscathed. It feels like that's what these kind of non-conference games, these moments are for, is to test your guys and say, I'm not sending out another pitcher. This is your mess to get out of. And obviously, you don't want to be walking the bases loaded on a regular basis. But on this case, he kind of grinded and got through it. And I'm sure it was pretty meaningful for him against this type of a lineup to find a way to get out of that jam. And it's you'd hope his moment of being I already believed I could be a college baseball pitcher and succeed, but this is the moment I know I can. And so I don't know what his usage is going to be the rest of the season. It seems like he threw 47 pitches and he was kind of at the end of his rope their chinny chin chin kind of escape job there. Kind of left it all out there on the 3-2 pitch against the last batter he faced to get the strikeout. But you need a guy like that to kind of serve over the middle innings, especially if you have your starter leave after 4 and you need maybe 2 innings to kind of get you the rest of the way. And if you trust Barkowski to get 3 at the end, that's obviously a boon, though. With these relievers, you're going to want to watch the pitch count at some point just because those are going to start stacking up, and you're going to want to make sure you can spread the love enough that you're not having someone wear down in March when you got important innings coming in April and May. But encouraging stuff. And then the next part of it was, I won't say equally encouraging, but I think important, is you go to Belmont, who's 2-6 entering this weekend, and obviously they played 1 game last night. They'll have 2 more today on Saturday, and they'll close out with a 4th game on Sunday before Georgia Tech has a spot at Revenge at the Striper Stadium Tuesday at 6 p.m. They won 4-1 on Friday night, got back on the horse, took a road trip, kept it going. Like, not that you expected it to be like, oh, and they're going to drop the ball here and lose by 10 runs or whatever, but it's like you kept the momentum. And Tyson Benford gives you 6 innings, 10 Ks, no earned runs, just the 1 unearned. And you never really put him away totally. It was a 1-run game entering the 9th inning before you got a little bit of insurance, and you end up with the 4-1 victory. But tight enough that it's like, man, you really don't want to lose this one where your starter gave you a great outing. And they got the job done. Michael Caruso, 3-inning save. No real drama down the end. And you keep it going. You win the opener. And this isn't... this is a series I think you're hoping in most seasons to win. Even, it's a 2-win team. It's on the road, but you're hoping that you can keep it going. But you still got to go out there and do it. And so through the 1 game we have to talk about with that series, they're still on track, and they're 8-2. No matter who you've played, this is a team that's won 80% of its games through the first 10 of the season. Like, they are having a, pardon the pun, home run start of the season.
Certainly are. And they're not even hitting home runs, like that, I think, to me, is the crazy part. I'm just going to keep, no pun intended, hammering home that point, just because we have not seen a Georgia State baseball team be so fluid at putting points on the board without relying on the home run ball, and if they're going to keep pitching, like if Bedford's going to keep pitching like this, 7 of his 10 strikeouts were strikeouts with swings, that's a pretty good day at the office. 6 innings, 7 swinging strikeouts, 10 total. Yeah, it's you. He was feeling something on Friday.
Yeah, and we didn't really know the exact plan with the starters, the rotation, the weekend, and when he started opening day, it's like, all right, so Benford's moving from the bullpen to being kind of a more enhanced big role. And you can see why with outings like that. That is Friday starter stuff. Maybe you're going to have some tougher assignments in conference play than Belmont on the road here, but you still got exactly what you needed from the guy that you have designated your number 1 ace and led you to a Friday win, start the series off right. Past that, you got 2, so Saturday is going to just be a test of just like the deepness of your bullpen. But the other thing to mention is, like, whatever college sport we are talking about, kind of the name of the game at this point is you just have to replace what you lose. You have to find a way to replace what you lose. And they've changed tack as far as they aren't going out there and trying to replace Michael McGinnis and Colin Hynek and, all the guys over the last couple of years that have hit a lot of home runs for them. But in Lucas Grantham, the new catcher, they kind of have so far replaced Colin Hynek. He's given you about what Colin's given you. He has 2 of the 4 home runs this team has. Big one against Georgia Tech to grab that lead that they never gave back up. The other one's Hunter Carlson, leads the team with 15 RBIs, has one of the other ones. And then Wesley Bass has the 4th. But they have 75 RBIs. They have 83 runs off of that. They're certainly new style, finding a way. We got 19 stolen bases the first 10 games. That'll play. Interested to see how they're able to close out this weekend. And then, look, would it surprise either of us if Georgia Tech goes 12-2 and just kind of exercises their demons next Tuesday when they play in Gwinnett? No. But that's what Georgia Tech's probably going to do with a lot of teams this season. And so I think the fact that you avoided that once and got yourself a fairly comfortable win in the end in their stadium still speaks a lot to the potential of what this team could do.
Yeah, I was curious. Georgia State is second in the Sun Belt in runs scored, just behind Coastal at 417. Georgia State's at 408.
You want to keep this going. Obviously, 3 of 4 or sweep here against Belmont would be great. Charleston Southern, last I checked, they were undefeated. I don't know if that's still the case, but might be a tough series next weekend. We'll get into that, obviously, when it comes along. But the test will be, as you get into conference play, can you keep up, maybe not this pace totally, because 8+ runs a game is a monster pace to keep up, but as long as when the pitching assignments get harder, you're playing your Coastals, your Texas States, that you are able to still find a way to manufacture these runs. Like, that is still a test that you still have to find out about this team, but you can only judge based off what you've seen so far, and what you've seen so far has been, I think, an A+ start to the season, magnified by a marquee win against an in-city rival opponent, whatever you want to call them. I know there's some Georgia Tech people kind of not liking like people talking about it being like a crosstown rival, I think is how the Sunbelt official account referred to it, and it's like, but that's like a thing you say. Like, even if they aren't like rivals, it's like crosstown rival, which is kind of like a colloquialism we use, but whatever terminology is, we're going to work for everyone involved.
The city
and win against that type of team
for both of them. Like that is a correct statement.
It is like a cherry on top for Georgia State that it was Georgia Tech, but it could have been any top 5 team, and that would have been a really nice indication of like how good this team could be when they've got it all firing, as they certainly did last Tuesday night, and they're going to hope to have the rest of this weekend in Nashville. All right, as I had mentioned, don't know exactly when we're going to record next, and obviously I said that last time, it ended up being more than a week. I think it'll be less than a week this time, but as the results come in from Pensacola, as whatever other news items might pop up that are going to warrant immediate discussion, we will be back in front of these podcast mics to talk about it. But in the meantime, from David and myself, thank you for listening to this episode of the Thursday Night Podcast. We will catch you next time, whenever that may be.